There we go. Well, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Major Dan Baller. I'm an assistant professor here in the math department here at West Point, and I'm the director for the CDAS, the Center for Data Analysis and Statistics. So today we're going to go through a few things with R Markdown and GitHub. I got 3 real objectives to come out of this class. The first is that everyone has their RStudio tied to their GitHub account when they walk out of here. So you'll be able to interact with GitHub through RStudio, which ties into our third objective here of being able to interact with GitHub to push and pull files just straight through the RStudio interface. And then in the middle there, we're going to talk about some R Markdown basics. And so we're going to look at some of the cool things that you can do with R Markdown and why I choose to use it for just about everything I ever do. Now, I'm not really going to use any slides for today's class. I have put together a slide deck that is very wordy, but serves to really be a standalone resource that covers everything step by step that I'm going to go through today. I'm going to drop this link in the chat so you guys have it. And these slides are completely made with R Markdown. So I'm going to drop this in here. And so this will serve as a reference that you can go back to anytime after the class. I'm going to email this out as well, so you don't have to copy down the link or anything. But the slides will walk you step by step everything that we're going to do today. All right. So to start, we're going to start in GitHub. So if you go to your main GitHub page, when you first log into GitHub, you should see something that looks like this. Right, this is that GitHub dashboard. And what we're going to do first is we're going to create a new repo or a repository. And this essentially creates a box in GitHub that's going to hold all of our files. And that's what's going to create the project on our computer and the folder on your computer that's going to hold everything locally for you. So to start a new repo, I'm just going to click this green new button. I'm going to give it a name. And so this is just my Markdown. Have any spaces in here? And Markdown GitHub class. I can give it a description if I want. And there's a few options that we can choose after that. I can either make it a public or a private repo. If it's a public repo, anyone that finds the link can access it. They can see all of the files you have in there and they can download them. If it's private, it's just for you and anyone else that you decide to invite as a collaborator. So I tend to, when I'm doing thesis work, I'll start a private repo for the project, invite all the cadets, all the advisors into it so that we can all work on it together, but no one else can see what we're doing. And then once the project's done, you can always turn it from private to public. So I'm going to leave this as public. I don't really care if anyone sees this code or any of the files that I have in there. The rest of these options, the main one that I want to talk about is the README. Adding a README file allows you to have a file kind of on the front page of the repo that you can put information about what you're doing. I tend to not use that because I like to use GitHub Pages. And I'll talk about that in kind of a future class, but it allows you to create a website based off of your repo. And if you have a README file, that's the file it's going to go to. So I'm not going to check any of these boxes here, and I'm just going to create my repository. All right, so now we have a repo. It's called Markdown and GitHub class. Whatever you titled it, that's what's going to be called in your GitHub account. So we're going to go to R. And the first thing I'm going to do here is once I'm in RStudio, I'm going to introduce myself to GitHub. And we're going to do that using the use this package. So I'm going to run library. This. If you don't have the use this package, you need to install it. You can either install it using the install.packages command and put use this in quotes in that command, or I can come to the packages tab and hit install, and it's going to bring up a pop-up that I can then download, or I can install the use this package. So I'm just going to run this one command here. It's going to load that use this package. And now we're going to introduce ourselves to GitHub. And so I'm going to use a command that is use underscore git underscore config. And in this command, is this big enough for everybody? Can you see it? Okay. In this command, I have to put in 2 arguments. The first is going to be my username. So it's user.name. And I'm going to set that in quotes. I'm going to put whatever my username for GitHub is. So for me, I'd put this as Daniel P. Fowler. Now, my second argument, I'm going to separate these with a comma. My second argument is going to be for my email. So it's going to be user.email. I'm going to set that to whatever the email is that is tied to my GitHub account. And that's really important. It has to be the email that you have tied to your GitHub. So for me, it's so when you run this command, I'm not going to run it because mine's already tied. But when you run this command, you may not see anything. To check if this worked, we're going to go to the terminal. And actually, before we do that, we're going to change a couple options. So I'm going to come up to my tools and go to global options. Now, if you've already installed Git on your computer, you should have a Git executable file somewhere. And when I go to this git/svn, I need the path to that executable file. So if you accepted all the defaults when you downloaded Git from git4windows.org, you should have a path that's really similar to mine. So if you don't see a path in there, use the browse button to go navigate to where that's at. And it's probably in your program files. You'll have a Git folder. You'll then have a bin folder. And then there's a git.exe file. So you have to select that file so RStudio knows where to go to open Git. Any questions on that so far? Everyone following me? Okay. So the next of our options that we're going to change, we're going to come down here to the terminal. And I want to make sure that this says that new terminals open with git bash. Right? There's a few different options here. I want to have the git bash option checked. And then while we're in here, we're going to change one of our R Markdown options as well. So one of the things that kind of drives me nuts about R Markdown is the default is for inline output. So as you're going through your document, you'll have your code, and then right below it is the output. And I really like kind of the traditional output comes in the console, whereas your plots are down here in the plot tab, and your tables are in the viewer tab. All that will show up right in the middle of your code if you don't change this option. So this checkbox here, show output inline for all R Markdown documents, this I want to have unchecked. Right? Some people like to keep the inline output. You're more than welcome to do that, but I just can't stand it. So I always make sure that I have that unchecked. So then you're just going to hit apply and OK. Now, when you go to the terminal, you should see something that kind of looks like this. You're not going to have probably anything in it, but you should have a $sign here in front of your blinking cursor. Does anyone not have that? All right, I got a few. So if you were able to change that new terminals open with git bash, if I come up here to where it says terminal 1, I should be able to click new terminal. And now you should have that $sign in front of your blinking cursor. All right, anyone not have that? I'm gonna check in on the Teams chat really quick. Anyone online have any issues with that so far?
I think Andrew Brown had a question.
Installing Git for Windows. That I don't know. That's something I'll have to look into and get back to you on that. Because if you can't have Git on your computer, I don't know if RStudio can interact still with it. And Pro, you're shaking your head, so I don't think you can without that. So if you can't get your GitHub tied to RStudio, it's going to impact you pushing and pulling files like we're going to do here in a bit, but it's not going to impact anything that we do on the R Markdown side. So you'll still be able to do all of the same R Markdown stuff that we're going to do kind of in the meat of the course here. So now that we are here in the terminal, I'm going to use one line to check and make sure that I was able to actually introduce myself to Git. And I'm going to say Git. And one thing about the terminal, spacing is incredibly important. All of your spacing, everything has to be exact. R is not really like that. You can have spaces kind of wherever you want. You can't do that in the terminal. So this is going to be Git space config space dash global space dash list. And here I'm just going to run it using the enter command instead of control enter like I do in R. And when I do that, you will probably see two things. I got a few extra that show up here, but you should at least see the username and email. And if that's set to what you put in that use this or the command from the use this package, congratulations, your GitHub is now tied to your RStudio. So we have successfully done our first objective here. All right. So now that we've tied our GitHub to RStudio, we want to take that repo that we just made on GitHub and bring it to our computer. So we got a local copy, and that's where we're going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and we're going to work in a project. And if you don't normally work in a project, I would recommend it. I do it for just about everything. It gives you this kind of self-contained box that you can put all of your files, any images you need, anything pertaining to that project can all go in that one space. And then you don't have to ever worry about your working directory, because when you go to that project folder becomes your working directory. So just as an example, here's our Moneyline picks. If I go to this project here, any of the files that I had open are still going to be open in that project. Anything that was in my environment is still going to be saved in my environment. And the only thing I really have to do now is reload my packages. And I can pick up exactly where I left off working on this project here. So it takes a second because I got a lot saved here, but like everything in my environment is there. All of my code, any of the files I had open, it's all right there. And my working directory is that folder for this project. So I don't have to worry about setting a new working directory or where am I working in. So I'm going to close this back out. And we are going to create a new project here. So I'm going to click on the project button and I'm going to hit new project. And so normally when you're starting a project, if you're not dealing with GitHub, you're going to hit this new directory button. And since we are using GitHub to kind of manage this project for version control, I'm going to choose the version control option down at the bottom. And then I'm going to choose Git. Now, it wants a URL for our repository. So I'm going to go back to GitHub. This is that repository we made at the very beginning. And I'm going to click on this button here, this copy button, that's going to copy out this URL for the repo. And I'm going to go back to RStudio, and I'm going to paste this in here. And what this is going to do is it's automatically going to name my project directory. You can change that if you want. I tend to never change it because then it just keeps it the same as whatever the repo is on GitHub. I'm able to connect those really easily. The last thing is it's going to ask you where you want to put it. So I have an R project folder that's just in my documents. use the browse button at this point to save this wherever you want it. Wherever you want to have this this new folder for the repo saved, select that on your computer. I'll give you a second to figure out where you want to have that. Andrew.
Did you get to clone Git repository?
You lost me how to start the project.
Okay, how to start the project. So I'm going to cancel this. We'll do this again. So here is the project button up here top right. And I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to click on new project. And it's going to come up with this pop-up. From this pop-up, I'm going to come down to version control. And then I'm going to choose Git. And then I'm going to go to that GitHub repository we created at the beginning. I'm going to copy out the URL. I'm going to go back to my RStudio and I'm going to paste it in here as the repository URL. And the only thing that you really have to do is set where you want to have this saved. So you're going to pick the directory that you want to create a folder in for this project. And once you've done that, we're going to hit create project. And being that this is your first time kind of tying RStudio to Git, you may get a pop-up box asking you to validate your credentials with GitHub. And if you get that, say yes. It's going to ask you for username and password for GitHub. And so say yes to that and you will get to this screen here.
GitHub sign in.
Yes, if it pops up for a GitHub sign in, say yes.
Sign in with your browser. Sign in with the code. Browser, I guess. Connected to GitHub already and signed in.
Yeah, you're signed in the browser. Give this a second for people to get here, checking on
Then
Teams.
Then the Git page says authorize Git credential manager.
Yes. Anything that it's asking you at this point, say yes to. Colonel Yankovic, did you have a question?
Just back to repository, I had a restart and I'm back at trying to determine the repository URL. I missed that from.
Got you. So if I'm on my main GitHub dashboard and you want to create a new repo, if you didn't create a repo at the beginning, you just hit new here. You're going to name it and then leave it public and just come down here to create repository. And that will take you to that repo page. If you were able to create the repository originally, you'll probably see it in this list here. And so I don't see mine. I can show more. And right here, Markdown and GitHub class. Are there any other questions? So now, is everyone at this screen? You were able to open a new project? All right. Awesome. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to open our first R Markdown file. So I'm going to come over here to, I have two ways I can do this. I can go to File, New File, and choose R Markdown. Or there's this nice button here that's just a New File button. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to come down here to R Markdown. Now, you'll see there's a ton of options here. There's a lot of different things that we can do with Markdown. We can create documents. We can create presentations. I used IO slides to make the slides for this class, the ones that I dropped in the chat. You can make Shiny apps, and there's also other things that you make from templates. That's how we made the Flex dashboard in the last class. So I'm going to leave it as document. I'm going to name it something. So class. And then we have different outputs. I like to stay with HTML as much as I can because I think it looks nice. It's really easy to interact with, and you can add a bunch of widgets and stuff to it that make your documents pretty cool. So I'm going to say OK here. And you're going to see that the R Markdown document, when you open it, it comes with some pre-populated code. And this turns some people off because you see this and it's like, oh, it's got all this stuff in it. Like, what am I doing with this? Well, anything from line 12 and below, we can delete. But before I do that, I'm just going to knit it. And when I knit, every time you knit, it's going to save your document. So anything you've done up to that point is going to get saved. So I'm just going to save this as Markdown class. All right, and you'll see this is our HTML output. So here I have any of the text that was in there. I got my code, I got my output, and it's really nice for putting together reports that have everything. It's got all your code, it's got all your output, it's got all your analysis, it's all in one place, and it makes everything really transparent for what you're doing. And so I'm going to X out of that, and we're going to delete everything from line 12 on. And so there's three main pieces of a Markdown document that we're going to talk about. You have your YAML, which is this area up top between the sets of 3 dashes. You have your code chunks, which is these gray pieces here. And then you have the white space. And a lot of what we're going to do today is in the white space. Starting with the YAML, these are really kind of a place that you can set options for the whole document. I tend to not mess with this as much as I can, unless there's some very specific things I'm going to do with it. We're going to change a couple things in it here later in the class, but for the most part, this is where you set your output and some general options for the output of your whole document. A place that we're going to put a lot of stuff here is in the white space. And the white space is probably my favorite thing about the R Markdown documents, is that anything that's in the white space is treated just as text. It's not treated as code. So you don't have to comment everything out, and you can use Markdown, which Markdown is really a markup language that allows you to do text formatting in this white space. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is a little bit of organization. So I can add headers throughout my document using the £. So if I do £1, this is a level 1 header. And I can go anywhere from 1 to 6. So if I do 2 of these, this is a subheader. And all the way down to 6 of these, which is my sublist of headers. One thing that you'll notice as I add these subheaders in is there's this button right here, and this allows you to very quickly jump back and forth through places in your document. And so it's going to kind of mark these off that I can jump through it. And this is really handy when you have really long documents. The code for the football dashboard is about 2,000 lines. And so if I didn't have this kind of stuff in it, it would be really hard to navigate and find different parts of it. So this is really nice for being able to jump through different parts of my code. I can also put a horizontal rule or a horizontal line here. By doing 3 asterisks. And so if I knit this, what you're going to see is it's going to take this Markdown code we have in here, and it's going to do some text formatting. So now we see I got that level 1 header. I got my subheader. This is my smallest of headers. And you'll see the horizontal line didn't work. And it didn't work because I didn't put a line space in there. So that's one of the things that you have to kind of pay a little bit of attention to as you're doing some of the Markdown code. And so if I just add an extra line in between those and knit it.
Appreciate everything you have done this semester. Thank you.
It's great to have you in class. Best of luck to you.
So now that I've added that extra line, you'll see I have the horizontal line there. I just needed that space in between those 2 lines of code. All right, so that was a little bit about organization for our document. Next thing we're going to talk about is some text formatting. So I'm going to do a level 2 header here. Text formatting. And there's a variety of different things I can do here. If I want to make something italic, I'm going to put it between, or I'm going to put a asterisk on either side of it. If I want to make something bold, I'm going to put 2 asterisks. I can strike through something by putting 2 tildes on either side. And I can even do superscripts by putting a caret on either side of what I'm trying to raise. I'm also able to add links in here really, really easy. So if I put a set of square brackets, whatever I put inside the square brackets is going to be what shows in the document. So I'm going to put in a link to Google. I'm just going to say Google, and then in the parentheses after it, I'm going to put the actual link. So https / google.com. So we've made something italic, bold, we've struck through this word, we've created a superscript, and we've added a link. Let's see what it looks like. I would have to double check on that. And here you can see our output. So here it's italic, we got it bold, we've struck through, we got our superscript. Here's our link. If I click on this, it's going to take me out here to Google. And so really easy to add some of this formatting into your documents, make them look really nice. And now I know what you're all thinking. How do I underline something? And I'll tell you, I don't know the code for that. But this is probably my favorite new thing that I've learned recently is this button right here. And this is the visual editor. So how many people are more comfortable using Microsoft Word than they are using R? Okay, like a few, right? I would assume it's pretty much everybody, but if I hit this button here, what's really nice is it's going to give me pretty much a Word interface to my Markdown document, and I'm allowed to change things in real time. So it's going to render this document here. It looks like a little compass right here. If you don't have the button, you may have an old version of RStudio. And so you may have to update your RStudio. So by going into the visual editor here, it adds this bar here. And this bar gives me a lot of the same functionality that I'd have with Word. And so if I come down here and let's say I want this underlined, I can just highlight it and use the underline button just like I'm working in Word. And that's great. If I come out of this and I leave the visual editor and go back to my R Markdown document, this is the greatest thing about it, is it automatically puts in the code for me. And so now I didn't know how to underline something before, I know how to do it now. So if there's things that you want to do that you're not really sure what the code is, you can go do it in this Word interface and then go see the code on the back end. Any questions on the text formatting stuff? Just checking on Teams. Everyone on Teams doing all right? Any questions? Okay, I think we're good. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is tables. And so if I want to make a table here, you can put in LaTeX code. You can do LaTeX tables in R Markdown. In my opinion, it's a little cumbersome. I'm not great at LaTeX code. And so, there's a lot of things that you got to do for a LaTeX table. In Markdown, it's really, really
Thank you. You
easy.
just cover it there.
I just have to separate my columns. I'll do one more with these horizontal lines. That's that horizontal line above your inner key. And so this is going to be column 1. Here's column 2. And I have column 3. The next line, I need to put some dashes in there to say, hey, everything above it is going to be headers. Everything below it's the actual values in my table. So again, I'm going to have the same lines. All right, 4 of those. And between these, I'm just going to put 3 of these dashes. Now, I can make it look really nice and pretty and have it equally spaced and put enough dashes so this all lines up, but I don't have to. One of the nice things about this is in this line, I can also justify my columns. So for the first column, I want to left justify it. So I'm going to put a colon on the left-hand side. For my middle column, I want to center it. So I'm going to put a colon on both sides. And for my last column, I'm going to right justify it here. From the visual editor, just click that compass button again, and it'll take you back. And then on the next line, we're going to add some values. So again, I got my 4 separators. This is going to be value 1, 2, value 3. Now, if I knit this, where you see I have this nice table here. Now, you may say this isn't the best looking table. Right? You can do a lot more customization with your tables using LaTeX code, but it also takes a lot more time. And so if you want something that's just kind of a quick and dirty table to put into a document, this works pretty well. Now, what's really nice, I'm going to go back to that visual editor for a second, and I'm going to add a table that way. And so if I come down here to the bottom, you can see this is the table that we just made. I'm going to use my table tab to insert a table. And I just have to tell it how many rows I want, how many columns. I can put a caption. This is the best table ever. And I want it to have a header. So I'm going to hit OK here. And just like that, I can put a table into this document. And I can use kind of that same word functionality to alter that table. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to highlight this column. And let's say I want to align it center. And so I'm going to put some values in here. This is 5. This is going to be 3, 1, 2. And if I go back, one of the things that I think is kind of cool with this, not only did it add in my new table, well, we didn't have this looking really nice on the previous one. It automatically went and expanded this out so all my columns kind of lined up in the table that we made by hand. Now, we can, besides tables, we can also add in equations here. And I like this for putting out solutions to my cadets. I can do it all in one document. We can have all the formulas, we can have all the code, all the analysis. And so I can use LaTeX code here. I can do inline equations and display equations. So if I want to put an inline equation, I'm just going to start typing. This is the formula. And I'm going to put 2 dollar signs. And in between those dollar signs, I'm going to put my equation. And whatever I put in here, it's going to treat as LaTeX code. Y equals mx plus, let's say, b squared. You're seeing real time what your equation looks like. And now I've added an inline equation. I can go down here and I can add in a display equation. See the equation
There, thank you.
below. And what I need to do for a display equation is put 2 dollar signs on either side. So same equation, y equals mx e squared. And if I knit this, you'll see here's my inline equation that we just made, and here's our display equation. Centers it, moves it down away from the rest of the text. Now, we've done a lot so far in the white space, right? The white space is really powerful because I can put all of my analysis there to go with my code and my output. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the code chunks. So there's a couple of different ways that I can add a code chunk to my Markdown document. My favorite is the keyboard shortcut. So if you do Control-Alt-I, it's going to automatically add a code chunk wherever your cursor is. And so you'll see that it's a code chunk because it's going to have these 3 tick marks at the top and at the bottom. That's the tick mark that's below your escape key in the top left of your keyboard. And the R in these parentheses tells it's an R code chunk. Now, one of the nice things about Markdown is you're not just limited to R. You can do D3, you can do Python, you can do Bash, you can do SQL, and you just have to change the type of code chunk that you have. The other way I can add a code chunk is I can come up here to this code chunk button. And if I click this, it's going to give me all the options of the different types of code chunks I can add. And so R is always the default, but you can add the rest of these, and you can do Python code in the same document that you have your R code. So in my code chunk, in this gray space, anything that is in there is going to get treated like code. So if I want if I want comments in there, I have to comment it out just like I was working in an R script. I got to do a #, and I'm just going to say here, we're going to make a plot. So I have my comment in there, and here's where we're going to do just a little bit of code. So I'm going to bring in the tidyverse package using library tidyverse. And if I'm going too fast at any point in this, please stop me, ask questions. I'm going to bring in tidyverse. I'm also going to bring in the Palmer Penguins package. We get our data from the Palmer Penguins package. I'm going to use the data command to bring in that data set, the Penguins data. I run this, you'll see it in there. And then we're going to make just a quick histogram so that we can kind of see the different options of how we can work with code here. So I'm going to take the Penguins data, pipe it, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut for the pipe, which is Control-Shift-M. I'm going to pipe that into my ggplot. And in the ggplot command, I need to set my aesthetics, essentially set what variables I'm working with. On my x-axis, I'm going to, if I hit tab here, it's going to pull up all of the variables I have in my data set. And I'm going to choose flipper length. You can choose whatever you want here, but we're going to make a histogram. So I want a quantitative variable. And I'm going to then tell it what type of plot that I want. I'm going to use geom histogram, and this is going to make my plot. So if I run this line of code, you will see I have this nice little histogram over here. If you didn't change that R Markdown option at the beginning of the class to get rid of the inline output, your plot's going to show up right here underneath your code. And so if you have that there, all you got to do is go back to your global options and uncheck the inline output on the R Markdown tab. So now that I have this plot, if I knit this document, we see all the stuff we've done so far. In these gray chunks, it's going to have our code. And then below our code, it's going to have all the output. And so here's our code for our plot, and then here's that actual plot. And so I can have my code, my output, and all my analysis all in the same place. Now, this kind of looks like a mess because I have all these messages and warnings here. And so what we can do is there's this gear icon here that I can change the settings of the code chunk. And so if I click on that, there's a few things I can do. The first, I can name the chunk, which I would highly recommend. This is going to add another thing that you can jump to in your document. But one thing to pay attention to is you cannot have two chunks that have the same name. You have to give each one a unique name. So I'm just going to call this chunk histogram. And there's two real kind of schools of thought on naming your chunks. Some people will say name it with what you're doing in the chunk, and some will say name it with the primary outcome of the chunk. I tend to go with the primary outcome. I think the thing is just whatever works for you, just stay consistent. So here I'm calling this histogram. I can turn off the warnings by clicking this twice, and you'll see warning equals false. It shows up here. If I click on the messages, I can do the same thing. Message equals false. And I'm going to hit apply. And so if I run this now, we won't have any of those messages and warnings. It's just going to have my code and then my output. And one thing we can do with this is we can come up to this very first setup chunk. And if I change those options here, it's going to change it for the entire document. Now, the other thing that we can do here is if I go back into these settings, I can change my output. And so I have a few preset options here. I can show output only, which is going to hide the code and just show the plot. I can show code and output, which is our document default right now, where you can see both. I can show nothing and run the code. So this is useful if you have code that you don't really want people to see because it's not really part of the analysis, but it's made some data processing at the beginning that has to be done for the document to compile correctly. Or I can show nothing, don't run code. So this will just kind of skip over that code chunk when you go to knit this document. So if I do output only and hit apply here, and I knit this, you no longer see the code chunk before it. All you get is the output. Now, I'm going to go back. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go back and change this to my document default. I'm going to hit apply. And we're going to talk about code folding. I really like this as a very simple thing you can do to make your documents look really nice. It keeps the code, but it hides it so that it doesn't kind of muddy the waters trying to get to all of your output, but still allows people to see the code that's behind it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and this is the only time that we're going to really change anything in the YAML in this class. But I'm going to hit enter and tab. So I'm going to put this HTML document on its own line, and I'm going to put a colon at the end of it. I'm going to hit enter again, and I need the indentions matter here. And in this next line, I'm going to say code underscore folding. I'm going to do another column, and I have two options. I have show or hide, and this is what is going to set as the default. So I'm going to set it as hide, and I'm going to reknit this document. And what you're going to see is two things. One, anywhere that I have a code chunk, you're now going to see this code button. So the code is hidden, but as soon as I hit the button, the code shows up. And so it makes it so you can have the document that has all of your output. Everyone can kind of go through it without the code, but then if they're interested, they can go in and see the individual code chunks. If I scroll up to the top of this, I have a selector here that I can either show all code in the document or hide all code. So this is a really nice thing that you can do that's, I mean, it took us 2 seconds to change those options, and it gives us kind of that professional feel that it looks like you've done something really fancy with it. The other thing that I want to show that kind of has that same effect that's also really easy is Clippy. And so, what's that? Clippy. Klippy. So the Clippy package allows you to add a clipboard button to every one of your code chunks. So if you have not installed it yet, you can install it running this following code. So if you already have the remotes package, and I'm going to do this down in the console so it's not actually part of my document up here. I'm going to say remotes. I'm going to use the 2 colons. And the 2 colons allows you to go into a package and pull out one command from that package, as opposed to having to load the whole thing. So I'm going to, from the remotes package, I'm going to use the command install _GitHub. And then in 2 sets of parentheses and in quotes, I'm going to put RLESUR Clippy /Clippy. And so if you've already installed Clippy, you don't have to do this again. If you haven't, you just need to run this one line of code. It's going to install the Clippy package. And then at any point in our document, I'm going to put a new code chunk. So I'm going to do this at the top. I'm going to use my my keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-I to add my code chunk. In here, I'm going to put one line of code. I'm going to say from the Clippy package, I want to take that 2 colons, the Clippy command. Clippy. And I'm just going to put a set of parentheses at the end. And up here in my code chunk options, I'm going to put O equals false. And this makes it to where it will not show this code in the output. So now, from this one command that I've added in, I'm going to knit my document. And what's cool is this still works even with the code folding. And so if I go to any of my code chunks, so come down here to the code chunk here, I hit the code, you'll see I now have this blue clipboard in the top left corner of each of my code chunks that will copy all of the code from that chunk. And so this is really useful if you're putting together some sort of tutorial for your cadets or any type of assignment that you want them to be able to easily take the code out of it and run it themselves. We do this with the Tidy tutorial and the course guide in 206, that they can just copy out whole chunks of code and copy them straight into R. All right. So that's pretty much some of the basics of working in an R Markdown document. Are there any questions before we talk about pushing this thing up to GitHub? What about on Teams? Any questions before we push this up to our repo? Doesn't look like it. So you have been working on your local machine. I know we tied this to GitHub, but everything you've done is on your local machine. And so to get it to where someone else can see these files, we need to commit and push them. And so what you will see here is, since we created this as a version control project, you will have a Git tab here. If you have worked in a normal project in RStudio before, you don't have this Git tab. And so when I go here, it's going to show me all of the files that are in my project folder, or that working directory. And so what I want to do is I'm going to select whatever files that I want to push up and have in the repo. So I'm going to choose to push up the HTML file that we created today and the code that goes with that. So I just choose the little checkboxes next to it. And I'm going to hit the commit button. and you're going to see this pop up that shows up. Now, when you commit, you're essentially saving an instance of what those files look like right now that you're then going to push up to the remote repo on GitHub. So we're going to add a commit message. The commit message is really important because you want to put in what you did to change your code or why you are adding these files to the repo. So one, if something breaks, you know which commit to go back and roll back. And two, it's a message to your collaborators, whether it's other people you're working with or just future you about, hey, these are the things that I did, so you know what's going on when you come back to this code 6 months later. So I'm going to say this was our overview of R Markdown. Once I have my commit message in here, I'm just going to hit the commit button. It's going to save that instance of what these files look right now. I'm going to hit close. And then all I got to do is hit push. And this takes that kind of instance we just saved of these files and pushes them up to the repo that anyone who has access to that repo can now see them. So if I hit close here and close out of this pop-up, I'm going to go back to my GitHub. So if I go back to our repo, I'm just going to refresh this page. And you're going to see that it's changed slightly. We now have these two files we just committed here. And so anyone that has access to this page can go and see the code that we just did. And just like you cloned this repo to your computer, someone else can download this entire thing by going to this code button, copying out that URL, and creating their own project in their RStudio. And so we have now pushed our files up to GitHub. Anyone that we're collaborating with has access to these now. And when we want to pull down updates from others, all we have to do is hit this down arrow button. This is the pull button. So if I pull, we're going to see, oh, we're already up to date. There's no changes that have been made to the repo since we last pulled from the repo. So if I was working with somebody and they had made their own changes to the code and pushed those up, this would automatically download all of those new files onto my computer. Into the project that's on my computer. So it's all in that one space. So at this point, we've tied your RStudio to GitHub. We've gone through some of the basics of R Markdown. And we've learned how to push and pull files from GitHub using RStudio to be able to do some collaborative projects. Any questions? Okay.
If I were to put my data set into my project, it would push that CSV file into the GitHub as well.
If you checked it on here as one of the files that you wanted to push, yes. Now, I will say the only time this kind of goes wrong, well, there's a lot of things that can go wrong depending on what you're doing, but what I've seen is if you are trying to push large files, one, there's a cap on how big files can be in your GitHub repo. 100 megs is the largest file, or largest single file you can have. Now there's some options around that. There's get large file storage, and there's a few other things you can do to push larger files. But when I push things like the football dashboard, the amount of files that it pushes is too large, and it tends to hang in this interface with RStudio. So there's a set of 4 codes you can, or 4 commands you can do in the terminal that you can push from the terminal, and that takes care of that problem. So if here, I'll just do it. So if I go to the football dashboard, if I'm trying to push my most recent updates, I'm going to go to my terminal. Give it a second to load. Okay. The first thing I have to do is I have to initialize the repo. So I'm going to run git init. So it's initialized the repo. It's making that connection. I need to run git add and then an asterisk. That's going to say, hey, I want to add some files here. I'm going to do a commit. So git commit minus m, and then in quotes, I'm going to put my commit message. So this is just going to be simple commit. I'm going to run that. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, I'm going to push. So I'm going to do git push minus u origin master. And what this is going to do is this one line here is just going to push my files up to GitHub. So instead of doing it through kind of the GUI up here, I've done everything through the command line. I just committed everything. And so since I'm using GitHub Pages there, when I push that up, it automatically updates the dashboard that everybody sees. So one thing of note, if you're using the terminal, whether or not you have main or master as that default branch, anything that's probably older than 6 months, you'll have it set as master. GitHub has done some things to change it to main. And so any of your new repos, if we look at the one that we just created, I can go back here to the Markdown and GitHub class.
You have the CSV as part of the project?
Yeah, all of the data, all those CSVs, they all get pushed with all of that. So here you'll see if I go to the terminal, our default is main instead of master, since this is a newly created repo. All right. So
How do you add CSVs or other types of files into the project?
What are they doing?
So
Your local?
there's a couple of different ways I can do that. So this is where I have all of those files. So that's just that folder. So if I come here, let's see. So if I Markdown and GitHub class. So this is the folder we just creating that project here. Let's say I wanted to push some data with it. So if I go back to my R projects and actually I'm going to go to, I'll take one of the football data sets. I'm going to copy this and go. I can just drop it in this folder. I could make a folder in here that's called data, and I can put all my data sets in that folder. And then I would just have to reference that in my code that I have to go down a folder to get the data. But so now, since I moved that file, you'll see it shows up here. And so I can just check it and commit and push just like we did for the others. Awesome. Well, that's all I have for today. If anyone's got any questions, I'll hang around to answer any questions. I think January, February timeframe, I'll probably do a deeper dive on the dashboarding class and how to do or how to host a website using GitHub Pages. So I will shoot out an email after this that has the video and has the slides and everything associated with today's class. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. All of my contact stuff is, whoops. Here at the end. So. Okay. Any questions on Teams? Okay, doesn't look like it. Well, Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to Colonel Swenson for setting this up as a CFD event and the department for letting me do this.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.